prossimo relatore è il professore Neven Jovanovic, è professore della lingua latina all'Università di Zagrebu, facoltà di Umanità e Scienze Sociali, e collaboratore al progetto Architectural Culture of the Early Modern Eastern Adriatic alla Università di Ca' Foscari di Venezia. Ho ottenuto un PhD una tesi di dottorato nella filologia classica all'Università di Zagreb 2005, è editore della digitale collezione Croati Actores Latini e ha preparato anche una raccolta delle latine rinascimentali, prese, allora, elogi rinascimentali latine, laudazione surbium dalmaticarum. Allora, la relazione al titolo sarà in inglese, parlerà in inglese, ma c'è un handout con anche la traduzione. Anche la traduzione, no? Senza. Ok, allora abbiamo anche la traduzione. Allora. Ok. Il titolo in inglese è Architectural Latin of Ciriaco d'Ancona in Comparison, e vi prego di cercare di sostenere questo programma un po' stretto alle 20 minuti. Grazie.
Grazie. Apologie molte per non parlare in italiano. Il mio italiano è più turistico che accademico. But at the same time, it is significant that I will speak in English, because English at the moment has the role, as you are aware, that Latin had at the time of Ciriaco of Ancona. It was a language that made it possible for people to understand each other beyond borders without being anybody's first language, not even the Italians. So this will be a reminder about the medium in which Ciriaco worked and how his medium is different from what we expect when we learn Latin in school. When Ciriaco d'Ancona looks at Istrian and Dalmatian cities in the 1420s, 30s, and 40s, how does he use Latin words to present what he sees? Are those verbal images that he creates similar or different to others written in Latin during the Renaissance about the same subject? This is what I want to find out, and this is what I will invite you to look at using the handout that I have prepared. Now, in the handout, you will find 9 passages from Ciriaco's texts that we can compare to passages written by people who used Latin in Croatia during the Renaissance. And you will find one example that has no connection with Istria and Dalmatia, but that is very important for my conclusion. Also, I want to point your attention toward a map that is at the end of the handout. This is the map of Istria and Dalmatia, but it is presented a little bit differently. This is a map how it would look like to somebody who is sailing along the Adriatic coast. So it goes from down below to up to the north. And this is how the world must have looked like to Ciriaco d'Ancona as he was sailing along the coast. So today we will look at Ciriaco's sketches of several Istrian and Dalmatian cities. The names are here in the handout, but this will be cities of Pula, Vis, Split, Salona, Trogir, Zadar, Cavtat, and Dubrovnik. And I will show what can be found out about Ciriaco's usage of Latin words connected with architecture. I will also try to compare his usages with those of his contemporaries, which are less known than Ciriaco. They are mostly connected with Istria and Dalmatia, and their names are Filippo di Verzi, Coriolan Cipico, Marco Marulic, Frano Božičević, Gian Battista Goineo, and Palladio Fosco. Now this is important because we are trying to understand to what extent Ciriaco is different in his Latin style, where are the strong points of his rhetoric, and how he has helped shape the way that those Dalmatian people looked at the world that they lived in. A brief word about the previous research. My colleague and the leader of the ERC project that I am part of, Jasenka Gudel, has shown on the example of Ciriaco looking at arches, how Ciriaco views architecture with interests that modern historians of architecture can recognize as their own. We have had contributions by Neuhausen and Trapp and by Paroni that have shown that Ciriaco's idiosyncratic Latin stands to a certain extent outside the Renaissance humanist standard, but at the same time that Ciriaco's Latin language is a highly nuanced medium of expression that has developed in the first place to highlight the objects and situations that Ciriaco considers important. Finally, Goran Vukovic has recently described on the example of the Croatian city of Dubrovnik how Ciriaco served as a traveling agent of change for the people and places he had visited. These will be the starting points from which I will approach this set of Ciriaco's passages. The oldest one is from 1419 and the lightest is from 1444, and they are arranged roughly in chronological order. But I also want to use the opportunity to draw your attention to a recent edition and interpretation of Ciriaco's letter from 1444. This is a letter addressed to the Dubrovnik merchant whose name was Božo Nalješković or Natale Bon. And this edition was published in 2022 by my colleague Irena Bratičević, after in 1998 Filippo Di Benedetto has drawn our attention to the manuscript in which we can find this letter. I will be interpreting the vocabulary and style of the selected passages, and I will compare them, where appropriate, to passages by contemporaries and by successors. Let us start from something that we can call the level 0 of Ciriaco's style. This is a brief passage from about Škoder or about Skutari. The sentence is very brief because there is nothing to see regarding antiquity there. So Ciriaco says, sed ibi neque menia nec aliud opus ulum vidi et memoratu dignum. So basically, I didn't see anything interesting. However, this passage is not without its stylistic value. First of all, I want to just note that Ciriaco says, scutarim in hodiernum vocant. The phrase in hodiernum has a classical precedent, so it is attested in Latin writers, that is, it is attested in Pliny the Elder. And in a similar way, when Ciriaco writes, nec aliud opus ulum vidi, the Latin opus is here used in a very specific Latin sense, the sense that will be described in Calepino's vocabulary as tam publica quam privata edificia. And finally, and probably most strikingly, is the end of the sentence, which is marked by a stylistic figure that is called hyperbaton. This is the strange word order. This vidi, nec aliud opus ullum vidi, so vidi breaks the word order. Et memoratu dignum comes almost as an afterthought. But there's also the point that the two attributes, nec ullum opus et memoratu dignum, they go together not in a quiet logical way. So this is not a classicizing writing, but it is an interesting writing. And it is important to note that this interesting writing is used for a place where Ciriaco didn't see anything interesting for him. So in a way, he is rhetorically amplifying the simple idea that there was nothing much to see there. Next, in Ciriaco's biography by Francesco Scalamonti, about which we have already heard today. Now, when Scalamonti describes Ciriaco's early visit to Pula, and we will suppose now that Scalamonti is writing inspired by Ciriacan vocabulary and syntax, we found there the expression diruptam vetustate. So you will see ad eam ipsam venerat polensium civitatem quam magna ex parte diruptam vetustate conspexerat. Now there is a possibility that this expression dirupta vetustate, coming from dirumpo in Latin, is actually a variation of something that Ciriaco writes more often. He writes diruta vetustate, and diruta comes from diruo. So ruo, ruere is the same word that is given us the word ruina. Diruta vetustate would mean turned into ruins by antiquity, by old age, while dirupta vetustate actually means exploded by old age. So this is something strange. A philologist in me would think about whether there was a mistake, or whether this was a mistake done by Scalamonti when he was reading Ciriaco, done by somebody who was copying Scalamonti, or not. But anyway, this is one of the interesting points. Now, on the other hand, Scalamonti uses a phrase antiquitatis vestigia. So he says about Pula, nobilia pleraque sue antiquitatis vestigia vidit. Now this phrase antiquitatis vestigia, as you will see in the commentary, in the similar places that I won't read out here, is confirmed many times outside Ciriaco's texts. And the earliest usage that I have been able to find was a praise of Florence by Leonardo Bruni in 1404, and later a simple search can turn out this phrase in Poliziano, in the Mirabilia Rome, in Platina, and there are also usages in our collection of Croatian Latin texts where this antiquitatis vestigia was a phrase especially dear to Juraj Šišgorić from Šibenik, who was describing Dalmatia in 1487. So we have something that is very specific to Ciriaco and something that belongs more to a general humanist vocabulary of his time. But Pula as the city in itself is marked by three sites. First, there is the Arch of the Sergi, for which Scalamonti does not actually use the word arcus, but a simple porta, meaning city gate. Then there is the amphitheater, as in Vis and in Salona, and there are ancient tombs which stretch all the way from the city to the sea. Now, the last image could have been familiar to Ciriaco from Dante's Inferno, Canto Nono, where Dante says, si coma pola presso del Quarnaro, I sepulcri fanno tutto il loco varo. So I condense a little bit. By the 19th century, all traces of these tombs have disappeared, but Ciriaco has seen them. And he used for these words, for the tombs, he used the words lapidea sepulchra, so meaning the tombs of stone, the expression which seems predominantly Christian in usage, because I found it mostly in Christian contexts and only in a description of a tomb of Hannibal, there is it used outside Christianity. The description of Pula by Scalamonti and Ciriaco should be compared to the later one that has been written by Giovanni Battista Goineo, almost a century and a half later. It will be notable that Goineo also uses the words antiquitatis vestigia, that he also looks at the amphitheater, that he looks at the ancient inscriptions, but Goineo chooses not to mention the Arch of the Sergi, regardless of the attention of architects that it has attracted, and he replaces the actual tombs by a printed collection of figures, by a printed collection of inscriptions, and adds to it a more modern, a more practical description about the large port that Pula has. So this will be one of the examples how we, of course, Goineo and Ciriaco are looking at the same thing. And by looking at the same thing, they see much of the same, but they're not seeing exactly the same. And when they have to write about this, they use some of the words which are similar and some of them which are not. However, and the other examples which I will go through much more briefly, we can see that what Ciriaco has seen has to some extent shaped the way that people who were born and lived in Istria and Dalmatia looked at the places they were born in. The question, of course, is if Ciriaco's manuscripts are not preserved, how were those people able to know about words that Ciriaco has used? Here it is important to note that Ciriaco's text did not circulate only in large manuscripts, regardless of 3 or 6 volumes, but they also circulated as individual letters because it was part of Ciriaco's way of doing things. When you come to a strange place, the first thing that you want to know, you want to meet somebody. Scusi. You want to meet somebody, you want to get to know somebody, and then you want to, in a way, to make yourself remembered, to repay for the hospitality that you have found. This is what happened, and I will jump over many of those examples, because I want to show you that this is what happened in Dubrovnik in 1443, number 9 on the handout. Of course, I invite you to read all those other examples for yourself. Now in Dubrovnik, Ciriaco had met a colleague of his. He was also a merchant, but he was a local merchant. His name was Božo Natale Nalješković, son of Dobrić Nalješković. He was not a patrician, but a common citizen, but he was quite rich cloth merchant. And Ciriaco was a guest in Nalješković's house. And this is a place, this is a part where we can see how Ciriaco describes not only public architecture, not only temples and churches and palaces, but how he describes a common house. Ciriaco writes, when he came to the house of Božo Nelješković, he says, intus vero, longe per lautas, ac omni ex parte pulcherrimis deambulatoriis et auleis, undique porticibus aquicolis cisternis et preciosis denique talamis accommodatas vidimus. Atque omnigenum suppelectilium genere ortestreis velaminibus pictique tapetis cortinis cocineis auroque permixtis peplis purpueris e sirico vestibus niveisque sindonis et mantilibus Sidonia quidem per preciosa arte elaboratis. So what we see here is in Latin a firework of expressions. Some of them have Greek origins, some of them are more usual, some of them can be used for private architecture but also for public architecture. But we also find some innovations by Ciriaco. If you look at this attribute that has been described, used for cisterna, for the cistern, aquicole cisterne, the word aquicole is not found in any Latin dictionary. So it is not listed in a dictionary of Roman Latin. It is not listed in modern Latin dictionaries. So it must have been a composite that Ciriaco has made on the spot. However, you will also find that Ciriaco in this letter is repeating himself because he repeats almost verbatim the theme of the conversation that he and Nelješković had. This conversation was about the four bronze horses from Venice and about the temple of Janus from Rome. And we know because we can compare part of the itinerarium by Ciriaco where the words are almost the same. So this has been my very brief attempt to show how Ciriaco has written something that has probably been preserved as a letter in a family of Nelješković. We don't have this copy. We have another copy which makes it possible for us to think about it. But this must have been prized in the Nelješković family because this has been a large compliment paid by a traveler who shared interests and culture with the Dubrovnik merchant. So let me try to conclude here, and I will be happy to mention what I didn't have the chance to say later on. So we have tried to approach Ciriaco's text first from their simple side, but this has enabled me to go deep and to look for the origins of Ciriaco's phrases. In this research, I have been able to discover some new material, some parallels which have not been noted with Virgil, with Pliny, with Properce and Livy, even with a scholiast on Lucan as models. But I have also been able to discover Dalmatian sketches and to see that these sketches are actually not the real Ciriaco. Because Ciriaco's best writing, his most interesting, most inspired writing, is what I have brought here under the number 10. When Ciriaco looks at Parthenon in Athens, then he really starts using architectural vocabulary. He shows that he can recognize architectural elements, that he can do architectural analysis, and his views at Dalmatian cities are more like impressionistic sketches. So he sees one or two things which are very important, and he makes this a characteristic of the place. However, these brief sketches of Ciriaco's have left their mark with the locals, as I have shown in the materials. And I think that those traces of Ciriaco have been transmitted indirectly sometimes perhaps even orally in something that a father would tell to his son. There was a guy coming to our place and so on. But we also can see that later accounts written by Dalmatians, and this would be the example of Marko Marulić, which I didn't have the chance to go into, actually surpass Ciriaco in the knowledge and understanding of the ancient architecture. And Marulić is able to do so, of course, because of the printed book that has come only after Ciriaco. Thank you.